Mega Man Zero 4. Well, this marathon has been a wild ride. As I dedicated my time to this marathon now, it kind of brings me to a bittersweet mood as we're now entering towards this endgame, so to speak. Especially with how much I even praised Zero 3 beforehand. Going back to that, I really enjoyed what Capcom did for Zero in that entry and how much they improved a lot in regards of gameplay, stage design, and overall feel. Zero 3 was a solid experience just looking back in general, and one that remains one of my favorite Mega Man experiences and even one of my favorite platformers that I'm always happy to revisit whenever I feel the need to replay the series. But then Zero 4 came around the corner about a year later in 2005, and it sort of made things, I'd say, a little bit interesting. Like I said before in this marathon, the Mega Man Zero series wasn't under my radar as a kid growing up in the early to late 2000s, so when the year 2005 hit, Capcom was more than willing to throw one final installment to the series, all while I was too busy playing Mario and Luigi's Partners in Time. Which is a solid game, by the way, and at some point we gotta cover the Mario and Luigi games now that I think about it. And based on what I heard from a lot of people when Zero 4 released, there was a lot of mixed reception as opposed to the previous titles, mainly because of what Capcom ultimately did do for this franchise. In fact, let's start there, because while Zero 4 is inherently not a bad game in the slightest, bringing what made the other entries work while sticking to the roots of what makes a Mega Man Zero game work, Zero 4 does feel a bit different in terms of its overall quality. Zero 4 feels like a final installment for the sake of it being one, and while it is a good game, there are things that sort of felt rushed or underdeveloped in my eyes. Some might even say that this game was never supposed to be a thing until Capcom decided to say, hey, you know what guys, let's just make one final game for everyone here to experience. And I'm not joking when I say everybody here, because Zero 4 does feel a bit easier compared to the previous games, even to the point where the game has an easy mode according to some research. Zero 4 is a game that both casual and die-hard Mega Man fans can dive into easily, which is weird to say because this is the final game of the series, and unlike the Classic or X titles, this does have an overarching story. Which perfect segment, by the way, since let's finish where things left off with Zero and the gang back at the Resistance base and finally conclude the story of the legendary Reploid. Sometime after the events of Zero 3 and the Mother Elf going off to who the fuck knows where, we see Zero back in action again, stopping the forces of the evil Dr. Weil, who, despite getting his ass beat with Omega, he still manages to have a stronghold in Neo Arcadia, upholding his iron fist of rule to the point where even a group of humans manage to leave and seek refuge in a location called Area Zero, where nature is said to prosper and return anew after about a few centuries. Turns out this Area Zero is actually the remains of the space colony Eurasia back from Mega Man X5 and X6, which is a neat little tie-in to the X series and all, but fuck, we're back to the age-old debate on whether or not this happened 3 years or 3 weeks. God damn you X6 and your stupid localization errors. With the help of Nij, a human and ringleader behind the settlement, Zero is unfortunately involved in their affairs as Weil sends a group of 8 menacing mavericks called the Enenhar. Is that how you even pronounce it? I don't know. But they're all there to destroy the natural resources of Area Zero, all under the control of one Reploid named Kraft, who may or may not be inspired by Rambo, and I mean, you tell me. With Weil up to his usual gaslighting, Zero continues to fight the good fight and stops the Doctor from his mad schemes, which may sound like a typical Mega Man plotline, but boy am I scratching the surface. As you're doing the usual Mega Man routine, the story centers a lot around the relationships between humans and Reploids, and how humans especially hate their guts with every fiber of their being. The moment Zero steps foot in that settlement, all to tell Nij the news of what's been going on, everybody looks at him begrudgingly, and I'm starting to think that maybe one of them even slipped a slur like they're a clone trooper back in Star Wars.
Okay, Clankus.
You know what though? It actually feels kind of refreshing to see that for the first time ever, we finally get to see what the hell humans are thinking in terms of what is even going on. To see their stance on the situation feels interesting because if we go all the way back to the X1 days, we never heard much about their side of things and what they felt about the whole Maverick incidents in each entry. We always heard of them, but we never heard from them, and we're talking about a series where a whole ass space colony crashed and wiped out a third of the entire population, as well as them trying to colonize the moon like back in Mega Man X8. God, they sure love space. In Zero 4, we finally see their point of view, and it's all thanks to Nij's efforts, being a Neo-Arcadian journalist who decided to call it quits and give Area Zero a shot, all to start a new life for humanity. Downright rejecting any notion of Reploids, despite her appreciation of Zero helping them out throughout the course of the game. And I think also at one point in the story, it kind of turns out that she had some love affair with Kraft too. Like, did I even read that right? Actually, let's talk about that for a second. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but as I was playing 04, I noticed the parallels between the relationships of Kraft and Niche and that of Zero and Seals. Clearly, there's nothing romantic between Seal and Zero, thankfully, because she's like, what, 17? But you see that they have a shared bond and trust each other with dealing with the threats they faced over the course of the series. Kraft and Niche are similar in that it was stated they were a tight duo before the events of Wiles' conquest, and since his return, the two drifted apart because of their differences in their shared goals. Niche and Kraft wants what's best for humanity and Reploids, but Niche's goal is to start anew in Area Zero, while Kraft decides that if he goes along with Wiles' plans, Neo Arcadia can be a true safe haven for everyone. Which is a stupid reason, by the way, because we know Weil will do anything to say one thing and prove another point entirely, like once again nuking an entire neighborhood to show who really means business. God, Weil really is a dick. Though, let's be real here, at this point, calling him a dick is being way too easy on the guy. I know I said my piece on him already back in 03, but 04 makes it clear how malicious his intentions are nuking another city otherwise. Weil also plans to use Ragnarok, a space satellite that can be used as a giant space laser, which he aims to use on Area Zero, all to prove how much of a tyrannical bastard he is and how no one can escape his grasp. This raises the stakes as Zero now has to fully prevent Ragnarok from launching another attack on Area Zero, which he manages to do so temporarily, but while, well, being Weil, he sets the satellite on a collision course to Earth, causing Eurasia Colony 2.0 because, let's face it, he took it too personally. It's an insane reason, and look, I get it, but it's aptly so for the evil doctor since he is just so hell-bent on seeking revenge on everybody, and if causing a global catastrophe is the way to do it, then you know what, so be it. Hey, wait a minute. Kraft, on the other hand, well, I can't say that I didn't enjoy his character. Similar to my thoughts on El Piso back in 02, Kraft, yeah, is very one-note, acting as the pompous Rambo figure that is antagonistic towards Zero, but he means well with his actions, and it serves the plot well enough for it not to be a drag sometimes. Kraft strongly believes in protecting humans from Reploids rather than coexistence, serving on the opposite side of the same coin to Zero's ideals. With its design being that of a war veteran as well, I like that it plays into his character because of his own experiences and dealings with humans, as well as Neo Arcadia, to the point where you do understand to some degree where he's coming from. Kraft believes that being under the delusions of Weil would make things better, while Zero, as hardened of a veteran he's been at this point, he still clings to the hope of humanity and X's dreams of a world where true coexistence between humans and Reploids can occur. It is a promise he intends to keep for his best buddy after all, and you know what? I absolutely fuck with that. You know, now that I think about it, the whole concept and theme of hope plays a huge importance throughout the course of 04's story. From the fact that Niche believes in humanity taking a new leaf and settling in Area Zero, the song of the first stage being called Esperanto, which I believe is an allusion to the philosophy of attaining hope and aspirations for a better future, and it being the leitmotif of the whole soundtrack, so to speak, Seal constantly being the one holding out on the hope and dreams of X, the Guardians, and even Zeros, being parallel to Niche and her promises, to Kraft and Zero fighting for the ideals and hopes of humankind, each debating on how they should achieve those ideals and how they should strive to bring a better life for both Reploids and humans. And towards the end with Weil, seeing Zero reaffirming that belief and not just defeating the Mad Dog once and for all, but also in Seal in hopes for her to build and protect the future for everyone as he finishes the job one last time. The theme is all there and is somewhat bittersweet because it shows how much 04 wanted to cap off the Zero series after the events of 03. If you even put 03 and 4's narratives together, you see that progression work seamlessly, even though 04 at times can feel rather disjointed from the previous entries. I find 04 to be more of an extension to what the Zero series has already provided up until this point, but it's something that you don't need as much prior knowledge unless you played 03. Still, from what I experienced, I like 04's story, and it is easily one that I can just find appealing because it wraps things up from the events of the series, and it is something that sort of feels like a culmination of the entire franchise looking back. But we're clearly not here to have a whole video essay discussion on appreciating the beauty of Mega Man 04's story. No, listen. While I personally enjoyed the story itself, at the end of the day, 04 is still a platformer, and that's honestly all I care about. And how do I feel about 04 in that regard? For starters, it's the basic Zero formula that we've seen for the past 3 entries already, so there's no real complaint in that aspect as I'm already familiar with it at this point. Zero is back to his running, dashing, slashing, shooting, and now apparently holding onto guardrails like it's the X5 days, but nothing drastically different all the same. At least not yet. Zero 4 really sticks to the formalities here, and I truly commend it because you would think with 4 entries deep, there would be things that would ultimately be stale, but Zero 4 doesn't do that. If anything, Zero 4 handles a lot of the basic combat and gameplay structure similar to that of Zero 3's, and it holds well in that department regarding stage layout and especially presentation. I will say Zero 4 nails it a lot in the presentation aspect and definitely brought the charm the Zero series was bringing for the GBA. Considering this was one of the last few titles for the system before the inception of the Nintendo DS, they really cooked here with the stage aesthetics, sound department, and overall quality to this game that, again, much like Zero 3, it feels timeless. But I can't help but have this nagging feeling in the back of my mind here saying that while Zero 4's presentation is great and all, it does lack a little bit of that substance that the previous entries had. For one, you have what Zero 3 brought back with all your weapons maxed out, which is again perfect since it cuts down the time in terms of grinding. But gone are your triple rods, your shield boomerangs, and your recoil rods, as now you have this. Introducing the Zero Knuckle, folks, and don't ask me what it does in depth because I honestly forgot about its entire existence. But what I do remember the Zero Knuckle doing is that, well, you yoink the enemy's weapons from them and essentially use them as your own, which sounds like a fun concept, but again, it's just not for me. I get the idea of trying some new stipulations and taking advantage of the enemy by yoinking them in the balls, but it doesn't serve any better than your typical weapons, honestly. In fact, you'll even forget the Zero Knuckle exists because you're just gonna be in the groove of slashing and shooting foes with the Z-Saber and Buster, which ultimately makes this third option obsolete at times. I just think it loses touch on what made the Zero game so fun to begin with because you have alternatives to choose from depending on your playstyle, but Zero 4 kept it way too casual, which is a kind of a detriment in my eyes. Though the times I did end up using it, I mainly used it to show off the damn mechanic at least, yanking this cannon from a wild soldier or taking this axe from this one enemy and just jumping with glee like a Castlevania character. Other times I had to use it was mainly for the story mission in the settlement to get rid of the fire in your path, and I yanked these fire hydrants to close the flames, and another time to nab this key card from a crab enemy to have access to a door that also had a sub tank inside it, but that was really it in terms of ball cover since again, it's not my cup of tea. Again, I just wish we had the other weapons at our disposal, or at the very least give us the shield boomerang since that was 3-0 until this game. Like, talk about an OG. Stage design is also great. Again, they really outdid themselves with the aesthetics this time around. Just with that intro stage alone, you can see where Capcom's heart was at making this final entry to the series, seeing the full scope of Zero 4's presentation and graphical fidelity. It's so visually appealing now, and the stage locales aren't as disjointed or confounded as now you're traveling to a more open-esque area like this ancient city that may or may not be the one from the Sky Lagoon incident back in X4. The hanging gardens in the skies and how you're soaring through each platform making me feel as if I'm in a more robotic version of Sky Sanctuary from the classic Sonic games, to even going inside a damn tree and dealing with threats as we're zooming and breaking vines. The stages feel more alive this go around and something that truly speaks to the X days of old. The later stages even continued that nostalgic train going, as the transporter stages had that glint of the X5 cyber stages, and Ragnarok kinda had that X4 vibe since we're dealing with a boss rush and Weil and, well, in space. And new to Zero 4, you can even change the weather for the main stages, effectively turning them into an easy or hard mode for added challenge bonuses, though it's not really all that much personally. They just up the ante a bit and make the stage again feel more alive and add more stakes into the game, like dealing with a powered up cannon in the particle beam stage that is just firing up lasers left and right. The deep sea stage makes you lose connection with Seal thanks to the extreme weather conditions, along with this massive time limit behind your damn back, all because you gotta stop this distractor from hitting the depths of the ocean before it's too late, to having the summer heat of fucking Florida scorching Zero to a crisp, making him hide under the shade or else you overheat. These are some examples of how dynamic the stages can be when you're changing the weather conditions. And if you play the stage under the right one, you even get the EX skill from that stage's boss, which, if you could believe it, this is the first time I actually cared about getting the damn skills. Yeah, we've reached the final game of the marathon and now I actively want to collect the skills like I'm an addict of some sorts, but I mean, there's more of an incentive this time around. They make it easier to grab without having to sweat your ass off to get an A or S rank, and if I can have the opportunity to at least have Zero pop off with these new skills of his for the end of this marathon, then fuck it. I'll have Zero be the legendary Reploid he's meant to be. Paired with the music too, these stages were again just incredible, and I want to really compliment the music department here for a second. They kept a very consistent OST going that didn't bore me out, and I had some tracks that really stood out to me, like the intro stage as I mentioned with Esperanto, which just listen for a few seconds if you don't mind. It really set the tone for how this game was going to be like thematically, and the soundtrack followed suit with other moments, like here for example straight ahead when we're first dealing with Ragnarok and the sense of having to go after Kraft. It's just incredible to listen, and I truly commend Capcom's efforts to give this a finalized feel, though they could have not used that drunk guitar so much in some tracks. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, then here, also have a listen. Yeah, it can be ear grating sometimes, and I felt like I was back in the X2 days too. Maybe in the future we could even recommend these tracks to Marco Meatball, who's also here on YouTube and reacts to music and all that kind of stuff, so maybe just throw in a little bit of tracks here and there for him to give a listen would be a pretty good idea. So hey, Marco, if you're ever watching this video, hit me up. Similar to any Mega Man X game before, you can now find the sub-tanks in secret locations in certain stages, and if you give these S crystals to this one resistance-based member, you can also nab 2 more. Though honestly, with the amount of grinding you'll be doing with a Cyber Elf system in this game, you really need only about at least 2 or 3 at the end of the day, and now reading this part of the script out loud, I haven't actually talked about the Cyber Elves in this game now, have I? Okay, really it's just one Cyber Elf. Instead of multiple Cyber Elves, 04 only has one Cyber Elf that you can just level up like a Digimon, and in that way, you get the additional perks. Now, I don't mind this system, at least for this game, because I understand some corners were cut and all, and I like how they only have to deal with one Cyber Elf as opposed to 20 like I was running a damn daycare. No, you only have this one Cyber Elf named Croy, which according to Prairie here, it means hope. Once again bringing that motif into play, as this last Cyber Elf is there from the beginning of the journey all the way to the end, and actually now makes me very sad. But as I said, I don't mind this system because it means that I'm only focusing on one Cyber Elf and feeding it the E crystals it needs to in order to get the additional benefits for Zero. On top of that, you can even customize the way you want Zero to be, adding several playstyles to your making, which I guess this was where they wanted to be able to experiment as opposed to giving us the usual weapon variety, but hey, you know what? I don't judge here. Maybe. But with this system, man, it's an honest treat, and I always go for the more traditional playstyle here with more health and stronger weapons because that's how I like my Mega Man games here, but seeing the different ways you can overall customize Zero is where I do think this Cyber Elf system specifically has its charm. However, make sure you don't abuse those perks because if you want that noble S or A rank, which, well, you already know how I feel about that, upgrade that Cyber Elf to the max so you can relatively have a good time here. 04 also brings back the part system for 03, but I am extremely mixed on how it was implemented. Unlike 03 where you found them hidden in each stage, 04 have you crafting the parts instead, which on the one hand, it does mean additional items to collect from enemies, but on the other hand, it just kind of feels like wasting your time. Unless you know which enemy gives which item to make each part, you will be excessively grinding for the parts along with E-crystals to get the good upgrades early on, and I don't like how I have to go out of my way for something that honestly worked perfectly in the previous entry. In fact, in my experience with this game, I had to look up a damn guide to craft the items right too, which is to this game's detriment in my opinion because this does mean the constant routine of forward and back in a few stages. And man, if that isn't the one consistent thing in this franchise, I don't know what is. Personally, I don't mind the item crafting here, but when you already established something as good as the secret discs back in 03, it makes you wonder what exactly they were actually trying to cook here, especially all for the sake of trying to be different. Because of this, I made sure to focus on the parts that matter to me the most, which was the double jump like last time for added platforming and reach, the quick charge and auto charge for dealing with enemies and bosses quicker, especially for the boss rush, Jesus, those were always a nightmare in these games, and the stronger and strongest defense upgrades to make Zero change from his iconic red to now a man in gold, perhaps auditioning for a role in the Saint Seiya anime when he's done with this. I mean, he is looking pretty stylish with that color scheme, I can't lie. Look at him tear Weil a new one with it too, hell yeah! The same is said with the bosses too, though this time around they do give more of the traditional Maverick bosses from the Mega Man X days. Not a complaint honestly, but it's something that I think gives more of a vibe to Zero 4 compared to the other entries, and I personally do remember most of my interactions and attempts at beating them. They're the typical bad guys doing bad things of course, but they have some good personality in them unlike the other Weil's numbers who were just generic bad guys who were following orders. Here you have a fucking chicken being a dickhead to Zero and a coward too when you face him, and I'm not talking about a humanoid chicken here. Deadass you're fighting a rooster who's pecking your ass to Kingdom Come, it's funny as hell. As for the others, their boss fights were of the same flavor as the previous entries. You don't need their weaknesses to beat them either, just some grit and charged weapons, but they do offer variety in terms of what they do offer. I mean, you got some cool bosses here and there like Mino Magnus who just shifts the gravity of Zero, and one menacing looking Minotaur with an axe, that's baller as fuck. Soul Titanium, you had to sort of play hide and seek while beating her ass, which I thought was unique to a Mega Man boss fight. Not often you have to deal with both a boss and a stage hazard all at once, and I low-key fuck with that idea. Heat Gem Blend was interesting because you can't really hit him directly unless he stops to hide his head, and I like how when you're trying to prove him wrong, like, oh, what the hell, man? Pegasus Eclair, which sounds like a dish now that I read that out loud, was also something of a boss fight, though it's my least favorite of these guys. It's not bad, but because I get nervous when I deal with bottomless pit scenarios and my recklessness gets in the way of that, I kinda try to outmaneuver it, which results in epic proportions of failure. Pair that with this one time I had Joy-Con drift on my Pro Controller, since yeah, I am playing this on the Legacy Collection with my Switch. Yeah, it was definitely a great time. And I guess for Zero 4, they give us two ice bosses, Tech Kraken and Fenrir Luna Edge, though Fenrir is just a better one in my opinion, but Tech Kraken does have some neat backstory. He worked as one of the servants to Phantom, eagerly itching to battle Zero after he heard he beat his master twice and all, but when this was happening, I honestly said to myself, yeah, cool story, bro. But there's something about Fenrir though that I can tell by the look of it that they took inspiration from Blizzard Wolfgang from X6, and something about an ice wolf just works, you know? A design philosophy that stays true with the passing of time. But the boss I had the most fun experiencing here was obviously Weil, which I was just craving to speak about this moment honestly. While it's the same two-phase final boss you typically deal with in a Mega Man game, the stakes of this final boss in particular was what honestly made me enjoy Weil even more as a villain. As I said earlier, Weil is out for blood this time, and you really see he is not having it with Zero in both phases, that it had me feeling like I had some sort of adrenaline rush within me. The second phase alone was just so beautiful too, especially the cutscenes before it. Zero sees Weil still standing, and as Ragnarok picks up the pace to head down on its collision course to Earth, Weil merges with the core itself and becomes this amalgamation of terror, which low-key looks terrifying. It's so eldritch horror-like, how did this even end up in an E rating? But Zero continues onwards though, stating that while he can't stop the descent fully, he can destroy the core within, and as I sat there watching this entire moment play itself out, seeing how a space building is fused with an evil being and our edgy hero is making a stand against it, something just clicked right there instantly, like a neuron activation hit inside the crevices of my brain, and I already knew what I had to do, and that was to...
Oh no!
So that's what was bothering me. Obvious Sonic Adventure 2 comparison aside, this was still a great final boss, and I love how the stakes rose from each final boss to the point where, as Zero finishes off Weil once and for all, the screen fades to white and the job is finally done. With Ragnarok fully destroyed now, bits and pieces of it appearing like shooting stars, the world is now at peace as humans and Reploids can finally live in harmony without an Iron Fist ruling over them, and Seal here, though a little sad about the passing of her friend, finally thanking him one last time for helping them and bringing them that hope that they longed to wish for. It also kind of proves who won in the end between Dr. Light and Dr. Wily, doesn't it? For as much as we were led to believe that Light's idea of free-willed robots was a good thing, and it was thanks to the efforts of both Mega Man Classic and X here, in the end, it was the primary driving force for other Reploids like Sigma to commit the atrocities they did throughout the series. And yet what ended up bringing up peace between humanity and robot kind was the one creation Wily made in the end. Wily made Zero as the ultimate killing machine, hell-bent on pure destructive power, and yet that same robot is face to face with a manifestation of pure evil and ultimately saves the day, kinda giving Wily the biggest W in the history of the Mega Man franchise. It's a bittersweet moment, and I can just imagine Dr. Wily up in Robo Heaven with Dr. Light going up in his face like, "Yeah, that's right, Thomas Light! That was me! I did that!" And you know what, just thinking about that, totally deserved. In that same regard, it encapsulates what the Zero series is all about, and it's also incredible to see that this was the final game for a Mega Man sub-series. 04 is the last Zero game and the conclusion to Zero's story. You know, as the credits roll, we see his helmet and possibly pieces of him scattered around in a crater, marking the end of the legendary hero, which is honestly refreshing to see. Sure, we have the ZX series to cover next and act as the so-called sequels to the Zero games, but it's not the same as actually ending a story arc that branched over the span of 4 games. This is a series properly concluded, and it ended in a way that felt great to Zero's character. If we go all the way back to X-Force's iconic scene, Zero asked what he was fighting for, and while we saw him acting all tough and mighty in the games after that in the X series, that question was still left unanswered. It wasn't until the final moments with Weil when he finally found that answer, where he flat out says to Weil that he never cared about being a hero or serving justice, but really he cared about protecting the people that he mattered most to him, making one final stand against Weil all that more meaningful. Pair that with falling down the boss track here and it just sent chills down my spine as I was playing it, because this really felt like Zero's last stand and his promise fulfilled to X in his fully capacity. It also shows the vision that Inafune wanted for Zero, especially when you remember back in the X days that Zero was initially gonna be the main character of that sub-series, and I'm just happy that at the end of the day, we managed to see that all come to full light with the Zero series here before Inafune decided to make Mighty Number 9. 04 is a testament to that, and it also shows how despite being rather unplanned, it delivered on something that still hits today for many Mega Man fans out there. 04 released in 2005, and here we are 20 years later with nothing new about the Bloom Bomber, and yet this game, no, the whole series looking back, was something that felt as if it was released today because of how much they cared for it. Now, this could be because of the Legacy Collection, like I said, which is your best bet to play these games in my opinion, though I also think the Zero Collection on the DS is solid enough as well. They both get the job done in anthologizing these games to modern hardware at the time, and it's just something I think you'll enjoy overall because, again, of how timeless it feels. The design philosophy speaks to that, and it's something that many games afterwards have tried to replicate, like the Azure Gunvolt games for example, which is also another beast to tackle someday, I'm sure. I mean, with how much you guys have given me the chance to talk about Zero, yeah, I think you guys probably want the Azure Gunvolt games. Let me know in the comments below. But overall, as we conclude this series, and most likely you guys want to know how I would rank these games, I would have to say that 04 is like my second favorite Zero game here, with 02 and 3 honestly fighting each other for first place, and 01 being at the bottom of the barrel. I'm not saying 01 is a bad game, it's just it's a game that arguably was very experimental, and your best bet to really start this series is with 02, since that's where I think the story picks itself up and then some. But I also don't think that my ranking of these games really matter all that much, since at the end of the day, I still want you all to play these games if you haven't, and form your own opinions about them too. Like, don't take it from a guy on YouTube to tell you what's good or not. I just play what I see and I enjoy what I play, and with the Zero series here, that's all that ultimately matters to me in the end. But seeing that we are now at the end here, and another marathon finish by the way, the next time I do have plans to cover the Mega Man franchise, it's going to be with the next sub-series, which is the ZX games on Nintendo DS, which, fun fact, that is also another set of games I never had a chance to play growing up, but I am very excited to cover them for the channel at some point, because I also do want to take a pause with the Mega Man franchise here, and also focus on other franchises that I kind of want to cover as well, and sort of, you know, diversify the content for a bit, and just some that I think you'll really enjoy at the end of the day. But like I said, that'll be for next time. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, thank you guys so much for supporting the content as always. Love you all to 120, stay safe and sexy out there, do good into the world, have fun, Peace out and take care.